Ladies and gentlemen, David Mirikitani with Mark Ostrander and Grant Turner. We are weighing in, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and sponsored by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. It is pre-World Championships week. We are lucky to have Grant with us in the United States this week. I think next week may be difficult to get him on because he will be in Oslo, but he will be our correspondent on the sideline, so to speak. So first of all, GT, before we go any further, safe travels in advance.
Thank you, bud. And absolutely, I can be your guy on the ground that, has a little bit of delay. It's like, yeah, I got you, Dave. Exactly. In the warm-up area here.
The hookup,
Grant,
for sure.
Grant, did you pass your COVID test today?
Took 2 of them today. So waiting on the results.
All right.
All right, we have the big story is Iowa wrestling, which we're going to get to, but we need to talk about a few other things that matter. First of all, it's Gary Abbott's birthday, and I want to say a special thanks to Gary Abbott. He was the very first person that reached out to me for podcasting. Just came out of the blue, no reason to, said, "You're doing a great job, keep it up." And Gary's an icon in our sport. You guys all know that. Mark, you started out as a head coach. When somebody reaches out at that level, says you're doing a good job, it means the world to you. And it meant the world to me. And Gary Abbott's the reason why we get to do this. And I get to talk with 2 of my best friends about wrestling every week. So happy birthday, Gary. Grant, I know you work with USA Wrestling a lot, and I've literally heard you say multiple times, Gary Abbott is the man.
Yeah, USA Wrestling, I mean, he is just, I don't know how to describe him other than he's just like irreplaceable. He is the man beyond anybody's expectations or words. He is just, he's just a legend in his position with USA Wrestling. Huge fan of him, and once again, happy birthday.
Yep, and Mark, you and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Gary, so.
Yep, happy birthday.
For
How
sure.
old is he, David?
We'll just say 39. I think that's the same.
Good.
I feel like Gary's the one that screens whether this goes on the air or not, so I'm going to say 39.
There you go.
All right. A couple other pieces of news. Stevan Misik announced he's coming back to Michigan. That's really big news. It was just, no one really knew because he was one of the first guys that got an extra year. He was one of the first guys to be able to transfer Big Ten to Big Ten. And he's had Olympic redshirt year. Might be his 7th or 8th year in college, but this is his last shot. He was obviously number 1 seed at the Olympics, but he's another contender at 133. That weight, Mark, you and I were talking about weight classes the other day. Put him in 33 and shake up the lightning bug jar. It gets even better, right?
Yep. Can't wait to see what happens there. Thought he might go 25. But
yeah, maybe he could. I don't know. They got to figure out what they're going to do with him and Ragusin, right? Because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's going to go 25.
Yeah, he hasn't said what weight he's going. All I know is he said he's coming back for one more shot. He wants to wrestle in Detroit, so for the national tournament. So it'd be fun to see. Michigan's going to have a good team.
Well, you know what? I probably am wrong. I shouldn't have said that. It probably makes more sense to put him on a shot clock and just let him go 25 because he can make it, obviously. Ragusin was killing himself to make it at the end of the year. And Michigan's sneaky good, especially the back half of the lineup with Massa, Amin, Brucky, Paris. They could have 2 finalists there in Amin and Paris and 2 other guys that have been on the podium. You add in a Misik, Ragusin's a pretty good maybe. 6 All-Americans is going to get you a lot farther than it does in some years because the talent is so deep and spread out. Yep. GT, you were at the Olympics. Obviously, Misik, or however you say his name, went 0-1, and he looked tight to me. But when he goes hard and he wrestles free, he's one of the best guys in the world.
Yeah, I really am excited for him to come back to the collegiate game. It gives us a whole bunch of amazing talking points throughout the entire year with his international prowess. Once again, the tournament being in Detroit, Ann Arbor, the Michigan squad is going to be really, really talented. Hopefully by then, all the COVID situation will be great for the entire wrestling community to come back together for the NCAA tournament and watch that thing, because it's going to be a wild tournament. Whatever weight that he decides that he wants to go, he's going to be a monster at, 25, 33, 41, whatever he wants to go.
Yeah.
He's just that talented of a wrestler that, he's going to mess some brackets up for sure.
He's an All-American. Wherever he goes, he's an All-American, which means somebody else isn't going to be an All-American. So, I mean, he's that guy for sure. Nick Buzakis to Ohio State. Some people thought that was a surprise. I talked to some people that thought that was probably going to happen. His dad and Tom Ryan have a really strong connection. I think they both have the loss of a child and have kind of bonded over that years ago. I certainly don't think that was used in recruiting. I just think they became friends, and then you tend to send your son to a place where somebody will take care of your son. But a big get for Ohio State. Ohio State was in the title picture for a bunch of years in a row, kind of fell off for the last year or two. They seem to outperform their seeds at nationals. Like they would take like 7th or 8th at the Big Ten and then go take 9th at nationals. So, but Mark Ostrander's favorite guy that didn't get to wrestle last year, Carson Karchla, is going to come back this year. And if you add a Buzakis and some of those other guys, Mark might pick Karchla to win nationals this year when we make our predictions. He loves himself some Carson Karchla. So, but the Ohio State's going to be good this year, man. They got some young talent up there in Columbus.
And I
right?
think I truly believe Nick's probably pound for pound the best kid in high school right now. I know he had that for quite a while until he lost in freestyle at Fargo, but he really hasn't had a close match forever.
Well, he lost Fargo. Yeah, he lost to Fargo.
Yeah, but in the collegiate style, wrestling in high school, nobody's really even came close to him. He's probably majored or teched or pinned everybody he's wrestled in the last, 2 years. So I think he's a big get for Ohio State.
A couple of years ago, he was wrestling Dylan Ragusin, and Dylan Ragusin was beating him 9-1, and he headlocked him and pinned him. But that was probably it. I'd say your statement's like 99% right. He's a goer, scores a lot of points. He's been at Lake Highland Prep. He's been at Wyoming Sem. By the way, Wyoming Sem gets Luke Lillidow, who I told you guys off the air was going to move up there with Cornell Robinson, and Jack Dara moved up there. So they may not be done. There might be one more coming, just so you guys know. So I got on the screen here Penn State's schedule, and I just point this out. This isn't to give Penn State love over anybody else. I think this is really to point out the difference between like Division I scheduling and maybe junior college or NAIA scheduling. I can only speak for junior college, and Mark and obviously can too. GT certainly should chime in on NAIA, but in junior college, we tried to wrestle as many tournaments as possible, tried to get as many matches as possible per weigh-in, and tried to wrestle as many non-junior college matches as possible to help guys get recruited. Because the best way to get recruited, like if I went Grandview to recruit my junior college kid, the best thing to do is go to the Grandview Open and my guy beat their starter. And before they shake hands, Nick Mitchell or Grant Turner will be walking over to the corner going, we need to talk about that guy. Division I is the opposite. They're at the top of the food chain, and Penn State's at the top of the food chain. They don't need to go wrestle a bunch of guys. They got great talent in the room. They've got the Big Ten schedule. They got the journeyman duels, and they've got the collegiate wrestling duels down in Florida. But it's just, I just looked at it in number of matches. I saw the graphic. I think their kids may go into the Big Tens with like 15, 16 matches. It's kind of crazy. Mark, you coach Shuko, you guys wrestle a lot of tournaments. It's just it's a completely different philosophy, right?
It is. But I think Division I right now, I don't think, David, you're going to see near as many open tournaments as we have in the past. I think this year, still with COVID still being around, schools are going to be hesitant to get out there and send, 35 guys to a tournament and, wonder if somebody's going to get COVID and bring it into the room, and then they got to shut down for 2 weeks. So I still think they're going to minimize the events that they're going to have. I'd like to see them wrestle in Oklahoma State. I'd like to see them wrestle in Missouri. But
they might in Florida.
Yeah, and they could in Florida, and that's a huge tournament. You know, the collegiate wrestling duels in Florida is going to be outstanding wrestling. What is it? 7 of the top 11 teams are going to be there. I think I
Yeah.
saw. So
I don't
I
know
mean-
the format, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's important that I'll let you finish your point. I don't know if they're going to try to separate themselves, like if Grant is Iowa and I'm Penn State, like, hey, we don't want to wrestle you here. We're going to wrestle you again next month. And if they do that, then they can do it that way, right? Like you just pick who you want to wrestle. They did that down at those South Beach duels. But if they do that, you're not going to see some matchups you want to see.
yeah.
So GT, you obviously are part of putting together a college schedule. Is Grandview more of the junior college philosophy or more of the cream of the crop D1 philosophy, or maybe somewhere on the 50-yard line?
Well, I mean, definitely, I think any small colleges, and this goes Division II, Division III, NAI, JUCO, you're gonna probably have a lot more Saturday, like all-day tournament type things. I know that the Division III has a very good, dual schedule within their own conferences. I know Division II has some of that as well with their regionals. But definitely on the NAI, JUCO, we're trying to get as many matches in as many different looks as possible on Saturdays. Within our division, yeah, we do have conference, duels and things, and there is a component to that. We usually try to get one, like a collegiate wrestling duel type event. We've gone to the Desert Duels in the past. We've gone to the multi-division national duels, which has always been a good non-division one showcase of the smaller colleges. But I mean, I think, D1, it's more dual based than it is Saturday tournament based, because I think a lot of and I would say for a majority of us, like, that's where you're going to get most of your play. It's really hard to go sit in the stands for 10 hours and watch wrestling, and if you're not a wrestling fan. But it's really good for the kids because then they can get maybe 5-6 matches in. So for Penn State's schedule, I like it from the standpoint of it's very dual heavy, but I also want to see, to Mark's point, I don't know if you're going to see Reno Tournament of Champions, Southern Scuffle, Midlands, Cliff Keen, any of those things pop off due to maybe institutional, red tape when it comes to COVID testing or travel or budgets or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's the other thing that, to be fair to the NAI, is you guys can qualify 12 guys for nationals. There's only 10 weights. So you need to see those guys wrestle in tournaments, because a program like yours, I can't remember the last time you didn't qualify all 12. So you got to figure out, and you guys can double up in more than 2 weights. So it's it's certainly a different dynamic, but just pointing that out. I think we love the Big Ten network. We love that Flow streams these duels. ACC network is on ESPN. Right now, I got asked to do the Virginia Tech, North Carolina, or Virginia UVA versus North Carolina duel in February. I'm really excited about getting to call that duel. So shout out to Steve Garland and the Paulsons for asking me to do that. And then I think we're going to try to work something out for the Iowa duel. I think we're going to reach out to USA Wrestling here in November and try to do something kind of special. We got a couple of ideas. Ostrainer, even though he's 137 years old, had a really cool idea. So I think we're going to try to execute it. But we'll probably make some picks. We might be some chicken wings bet on that meat. So I will probably pick. I almost always seem to pick the most Penn State guys, and I'm sure that'll be very unpopular in Carver Hawkeye this year. And I am dominated by Iowa guys on the panel. So those are some fun things coming up though. Okay. Speaking of Iowa, landmark news. Okay. Just landmark news. I'm going to just put it when I first started doing podcasts, I thought there'd be some weeks that there's stuff not to talk about. Something always comes up, right? Like we were ready last week to talk about 125 and 133 previews. We don't need to do that this week. For those people that haven't heard, University of Iowa has declared they're going to start a Division I wrestling program in 2023. Tom Brands went all in on his public statement. We're going to hire the best wrestling coach in the world. Iowa City's the best wrestling town in America to wrestle in. I'm sure other people would argue that, but it's certainly one of the very best places in America to wrestle. to be fair, Presbyterian has a Division I program. Sacred Heart is a Division I program. Do not want to slight those schools in any other way. But this moves the freaking needle. When Mark and I had I would say just a good discussion about it. I think we're going to get into it. GT, I'll let you go first. You're a Des Moines guy. You went to Iowa State. You're an Iowa guy, born and raised. I'm sure you want to see Iowa State do well versus Iowa, but you love the state of Iowa. You love wrestling. You're a Nike person. You work with all the women's wrestlers. I know you have some great super professional relationships with those ladies. You got to see them all wrestle at the Olympics. Help us accurately understand the impact of this.
I think, yeah, and once again, kudos to the other two universities that have started a female Division I institutionalized wrestling program, Presbyterian and Sacred Heart. Where this becomes a huge deal is it is a Power 5 conference edition. And I think in a Power 5 conference and having it be the University of Iowa, which to anybody's that's watched wrestling over the past 100 years, is a dominant wrestling program since the dawn of time, like the 1900s all the way up, right? So to have Iowa that has had historic runs within the sport, produced a ton of coaches that have gone on to go and create more disciples, Iowa now has a women's specific wrestling program. So I think that's why, in the context of how legendary this Power 5 edition is, it's very cool that it is the University of Iowa. I think it's also extremely cool that an Olympic champion, Tom Brands, is 1,000% behind the addition of women's wrestling and is an advocate for women's wrestling. Also that Gary Barta, the athletic director at Iowa, is a leader in this. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can slice this up, but I think just having it be at the University of Iowa in the hotbed of wrestling country within the Midwest, they will have attendance there immediately out the gate, I believe. I think there's going to be so many people from the state that are going to support it. I think there's enough local people that will want to go because it is Iowa and Iowa wrestling, but it's female Iowa wrestling. And, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what that program looks like. And I know that they're going to get a really good coach and take it in their own direction. I think that was in Tom Brand's statement that they are going to go it's going to be its own separate program, but it's going to be Iowa women's wrestling program. It's not going to be the Iowa men's program just with women there.
So a couple of things. First of all, GT I know Mark knows this. I actually went to Iowa State coming out of high school. And when I was there, which was 100 years ago, wrestling was on Iowa Public Television. Is it still on Iowa Public Television there? I mean, is it still that? It's on the news. Like highlights from the Cedar Rapids tournament, that kind of stuff is on the news right there, like on the sports.
It's through MediaCom. Yeah, it's the same type of thing. It's just not Iowa Public Television any longer.
Okay, but it's the big duels are streamed there. You don't have to have Big Ten Network to watch these meet. So, Mark, you had a very interesting take when we talked about the domino effect of this. I don't want to take away anything else, but I do want to make sure you get to that as well. So I'll open it up. What were your thoughts and what are your thoughts as you go through it even more thinking about it?
I am in the same boat as both of you guys, probably saying that there were two schools that started Division I wrestling and for the women. And I think that's outstanding. And I think it made a big push. But I think when the University of Iowa says, okay, we're going to start a women's wrestling program, you guys might want to all get in line. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. We may not agree on this, but I think you're going to see women's wrestling in every Big Ten school within the next 3 years. And I think you're going to see it at the major schools that have men's wrestling also start women's wrestling. Because here's the one thing that I see what's going on. And the Big Ten and the other conferences are so competitive. They want to be top tier. And you're not going to let the University of Iowa start a program and get out there and get all the best kids and say, well, we're going to wait and see how this goes. we need to get in there and start getting some of these kids. And there is just an absolute ton of talent on the women's side that would love
We've been
to
talking
go.
about that for 4 months this summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're gonna want to go to these Power 5 schools. Right now, Grandview's getting a lot of really good female wrestlers. A lot of these schools that started 2-3 years ago are getting the best girls. Well, now that you start putting Power 500 conferences, or the top 5 conferences in Division I, some of these girls, not the ones that have already signed, hopefully, I hope they stay where they're at because they're in good programs. But some of the, the younger girls are going to say, hey, I can go to Ohio State, I can go to Penn State, I can go to Iowa and be part of something that's just being built in the power conferences. That's what I want to do. And I mean, we could name 5 or 6 young girls that are still in high school that everybody would love to have. And
Well,
we had talked about some of them.
Blades
Yeah.
and Wilker might be on
Yeah,
most
2 of them right
people's.
off the top. So, I mean, I really think these other schools, David, my guess is that 8 or 9 schools are going to announce by the end of this year that they are also going to start women's wrestling, and they'll all start about the same time. And then I think next year you're going to see that's probably going to double, and the year after that it may double again. So, it's going in the right direction, and I can't be happier.
So let me say, I hope everything you think is going to happen is right. I think, no, everything. The Big Ten, all 14 schools have wrestling. I don't think there's any other conference that's the case. The ACC, every school doesn't have wrestling. The Big Ten, every school doesn't have wrestling. Maybe the EIWA, every school has wrestling. I don't know. But the Big Ten, obviously the SEC doesn't, and then obviously the Pac-12 doesn't. So the Power Fives, it's the only one. The fact that Iowa is a Big Ten school, I think makes your theory more likely, right? Like, I think if Oklahoma State was the one to start it, I think it's less likely that every other Big 12 school is going to start wrestling, because every other Big 12 school doesn't even have men's wrestling, so they don't feel compelled to do so. You and me had an interesting conversation about this, and me, I'm a numbers guy. Like, I went through the budget, and I'll just go big picture. You have to pay coaches. There's a travel budget. There's a recruiting budget. There's uniforms. There's mats. Some of that mats and stuff, like you work on the same room. Maybe you can travel on the same bus to wherever, the men's team is going. But in general, there's a double down on, or there's a extra set of expenses, and you're giving out scholarships. The idea then is, like, if 9.9 is the number for women, ideally you recruit 30 to 35 young ladies. So 20 to 25 are essentially paying full freight. Then there's the whole theory that for every kid that comes, they usually bring about another person to a person and a half with them. And hopefully you're at break even. I think Iowa might be the only place in the country where a couple thousand people would come out to watch women's wrestling. I hope I'm wrong, but at this point, I think that's how it is. I know this, and people hate it when I say this, but people root for the laundry. Like, Iowa Penn State will be sold out on January 28th. The World Cup wasn't sold out in Iowa City, which to me was like, I'm a dork, and like, I'd rather see the worst guy on our World Cup team was better than the worst guy on Iowa or Penn State's team, so it's a different thing. And Grant, we need to go deep in this, but I kind of think some of these women's Big Ten schools, if I were pushing it or promoting it, I'd be like, let us follow an NAI type of model where we know how much the school really needs to get for every kid to come in and for it to be profitable. You can recruit these numbers and make it happen. And I think that would probably be a good way to kind of get some programs open, don't you?
I think so. I think there's a lot to unpack with the expansion of women's wrestling. We could go down a million different tangents on this, but I think taking the approach of, getting the program started, getting donors and people to invest. Anytime you start a program, it's very difficult. But you have enough, I would say, loyalty to the Iowa wrestling program that's going to bleed over and you're going to have a supporter of both. Now, once again, you're going to have your own donors that are going to be specifically for women. You're going to have donors that are going to be specifically for men. And it's going to be the responsibility of that head coach of the women's program to then build your fan base, build your marketing, build all of those type of things. But I think you're going to get enough people that are truly just Iowa fans. And if you can market it and bring them in at the same time as, like a double duel, or, all of a sudden you get to have the first ever women's wrestling event inside the MediaCom Extreme Center, which is the new venue that is a little bit more, it's not Carver. So, I mean, it's like 5,000 or whatever it is, and right off the landing there. But you maybe bring that in for an event and you get, the Iowa wrestling team to be there or anything like that. So you get some crossover. But I think getting that program started is a huge deal, and getting it off on the right foot, in my opinion. Start recruiting as many girls as you possibly can, because a lot of people are going to flock to Iowa City to be on that team.
Well, we talked about like the Welkers and the Blades of the world. And I think Mark is right. Like, unless some other schools come out quick, they're going to have the pick of the litter. Like, I know you guys picked up like Alexis Gomez. I know you guys picked up basically the Hodge winner, right? The girl from Broken Arrow, right?
Yeah. Emily Brown, I believe.
Yeah.
I haven't got a chance to meet her yet.
Yeah.
But
well, like, her dad's a friend of mine. Like, she actually came to a clinic I did. She's kind of a freaking savage, man. Like, really nice girl. And she gets on the mat. That girl's all business, and she's won a lot of stuff. Like if Oklahoma State or Oklahoma University had a wrestling program and for women, Grandview probably doesn't get her. I mean, just,
no.
She probably stays, right? Like, so I think that's going to be interesting to see. So Mark, I hope you're right. Big Ten within 3 years. I wrote that down. I also wrote down that Extreme Arena grant where that's in Coralville or something, but it's close. And like, that's kind of a smaller arena too, but really cool. If they think had like 1,500 or 2,000 capacity or something like that, where they could probably fill that up, and it would just, you don't want to put 3,000 people in a 16,000 or 2,000 people in a 16,000 seat arena. You want to put 2,000 people in a 1,500 seat arena, and people are just on top of each other going crazy. So Cody Goodwin put out an article about the coaches. There was one, I can tell you this right now, the new women's coach at Iowa will not be Mark Perry Jr. That will not happen. If you are curious why, you can go back and watch my podcast with Terry Brands, but that will not happen. Okay, so
I'm going to tell you right now, he would be really, really good at it. He's a phenomenal coach. He's got a rapport with his athletes like nobody else. And you got to remember also, David, like Tom and Terry said, whoever comes in, this is their program. This is not part of the men's program. This is going to be their program. So they're going to have to bring in somebody that's strong enough to stand on their own and build their own program. And Mark Perry is strong enough to do that, and is a good enough recruiter to do that. So I'm not 100% sure that's would never happen.
I can tell you it's never going to happen. Let me put it this way. He ain't going to be the first coach.
Okay.
If anybody wants to take a bet on the other side of that, I got you. I will be the house.
I think he would be a good head coach. Let's put it that way.
That's a different statement. Don't paint me into not saying he'd be amazing.
I'm not painting you into anything.
Okay. Here's the list he gave. Terry Steiner, Clarissa Chun, Ashley Sword, Sam Schmitz, Julie Salata, Joe Norton, Tony Ramos, Nate Engel, Mark Perry. So some interesting names there. If I had to guess, I'd guess Clarissa Chun. I guess because they're going to go with a freestyler. Terry Steiner is one. The one that I think is interesting is Troy Steiner because of Fresno State. And he went to Iowa, obviously, the Steiner brothers did. Chun would be interesting because she's not an Iowa alum. A lot of these programs hire all alums of their program, like the Iowa coaching staff, the Oklahoma State coaching staff, the Penn State coaching staff. I guess Cunningham isn't, but, and Varner wrestled for Kale, so they're sort of Kale alums. But a lot of the programs hire their own, hire from within or from the program. They don't have a women's program. So I think Iowa will hire a female coach. I think that's good. So they're probably going to need to announce it in the next 90 to 120 days so they can start recruiting. I loved recruiting. Mark, I know you were a great recruiter. I would love to get to recruit for the University of Iowa women's team right now. You're not recruiting against a lot of no other Power 5 D1s.
True.
So I'll take Chun if we're picking. Who do you got?
Grant, you go.
Okay. I think I would take Jess Medina.
I said that to Mark on the call, our private call. Go ahead.
I would take Jess Medina on her ability to develop cadets, juniors, and then do that. I think there is, if I still have the floor, I'll keep talking. So I enjoy Jess as probably the head coach and the figure of the program. I think, bringing in whoever else would be great for her. I think another person that I want to give a lot of credit to that would be an amazing hire would be also Nate Engel, if he wants to stay in that world, because he is a freestyle guy. He was just the associate head coach at Oregon State. So I don't know if he wants to stay out there, but Nate is also an amazing, talented coach and has been coaching Adeline for the past couple of years as her personal coach. So kudos to Nate and his resume. But if I'm going to put money down, I'm going to say Jess Medina.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you about somebody before we go to Mark. What about, and I don't know his full name, it's like Vladimir Izabanov, but the guy Izzy that coaches he coaches all these super high level women in the biggest matches. Is he a guy that should be considered for this?
Izzy's the man. I know that he has great personal relationships and ties with a lot of the world team members, and then also when they come to camp, a lot of them gravitate towards Izzy just because he's so available and willing to work with people. I know that he's worked with the likes of Jakara and Helen and Maya and Tamira and all those guys. I think he's talented. I don't know what USA Wrestling will do or offer, because Terry Steiner and Chun and all these people are based in Colorado Springs, but it's very interesting that they would have brought up Troy with his absence of, the Fresno State program. And I don't know where that argument or fight is at. If, he's still trying to resurrect that program. I just don't know where Troy is in that process, or if he's just coaching or just there until his contract runs out.
Yeah, I brought up Troy. That article didn't, but he makes sense, right? So, so Mark, I don't know what you're squinting at over there, but who do you think it is?
I'm reading names that they're thinking that it could be. I'm going to go with, if it's a female, I'm going to go with Adeline Gray. I think she's ready to start coaching. I think she'd be a phenomenal coach. I think the girls would really gravitate toward her. I think she's done more for women's wrestling in the United States than any other person. So I really like her. I think she should at least get interviewed. And then I think if they wanted to stick with somebody with Iowa ties and that person is a great recruiter, I'm going to go with Tony Ramos coming in, starting the women's program. I think with his ties into Illinois, I know he's a real big, I don't know how I want to say this, but he really wants to push women's wrestling, and he's doing that where he's at right now also. So I think he would be a good fit. I think some things would probably have to be done before he would accept that job. Like, I'm sorry, Tony, maybe we didn't say the right things or do the right things when you were here. We'd like to apologize. Now, do you want to come here and coach the women's team? And I think he would jump all over it.
So you know what's funny about that statement? I talked to Tony Ramos when the Illinois job was open, because obviously he wanted that job. He's an Illinois guy, right?
Yep.
And we were talking, and it just came up. I'm not gonna say we're friends, but we're friendly. He said he's fine with Tom and Terry. He goes, we don't have beef. Nobody needs to apologize. What was said was said. I think they respect the fact that I said what I said. The air is clear. We don't have to avoid each other. So I don't think it's a problem.
Okay.
You know, at least I know Tony Ramos doesn't think it's a problem. Maybe Tom thinks it's a problem. You know, I mean, obviously it's only one side of the equation, right? But at least 50% of that is a non-issue. So here's the coolest thing about all this. We're talking about some amazing names coaching a college women's wrestling team, right? Like Sam Schmitz is a guy that coaches 40 minutes from me here in McKendree, was a JUCO guy. I think he was an NAI guy, went to Lindenwood, is crushing it down there at McKendree, you know, and these names are coming up tied to Iowa. Nate Engels tied to Iowa. You know, you mentioned Adeline. She's won more world titles or as many world titles as anybody ever for our country. I mean, I don't know if Adeline would want to be a head coach. Like, I don't know if she wants to do all the administration and fundraising and handshaking and everything else. But could you imagine Adeline Gray is like an assistant coach, like somebody to break film down with, somebody to work on technique with, somebody to talk about mat tactics and strategies with? I'm 51 years old and I'd want to sit in on those conversations. So obviously everybody in the wrestling world, including us, especially because we're with USA Wrestling, are going to follow this story. But it's completely fascinating that this is happening. I also feel like Oklahoma State's coming next. I think they'll be doing this in the next year or two. If anybody saw it, the Dayton Fix podcast I did, they talked about the new facility, huge upgrade there. I know they're a Nike school, Grant, so I know you work with those guys. That wrestling room's kind of iconic with all the pictures. They have the drawings there of everyone that ever won nationals. Maybe sketching is the right word. I don't know. I'm not artistic, but super cool room. And they're going to make it in the locker room and everything else bigger and better, and kind of makes sense that maybe they would add women's wrestling at the same time. So, you know, and John and Tom Brands, I know, want to beat each other's brains out, but I also know they have a ton of respect for each other and have cooperated on making some things happen. So, you know, like in terms of the football stadium event a couple of years ago and doing home and homes, even though they're not in the same conference, I can't imagine Oklahoma State or Penn State wanting Iowa to get too far ahead on this. So, Mark, I don't share your enthusiasm that all these teams will do it, although I completely hope you're right. But I think some elite teams are going to do it. I think like those two schools in Nebraska, like those schools were like, you know, revenue can make a big difference, right? You know, I think it can make a big difference. So
Yes, what I wonder about, because I live in Iowa, and I'm going to ask Grant this. Grant, do you see Iowa State jumping on board, also starting a women's program?
that's a great question.
You know, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that yet, Mark. I know that I would say that those two institutions do not want to be outdone by each other, especially within the state. Very similar, like Oklahoma State. One does, you know, they kind of want to outdo each other in a lot of facets.
Yep.
It would be very interesting to see. One, I think from the Iowa State athletics perspective, adding another women's sport would then help them with, you know, some gender equity and Title IX, you know, constraints, because there's only so many men's varsity sports at Iowa State. I think they're down to like maybe 5 or 6 total. So that would be an interesting add to see if, you know, maybe other things could springboard from there. I think Iowa State geographically could do really well. I mean, once again, in wrestling country, they would be able to put some people in the stands to be able to help. And they have a very large fan base that would help support and get that program off the ground. I would say this would be an interesting conversation is where do you think outside of Oklahoma State, I think that if the Big Ten decides that they're going to get behind this, like Mark is asking that the Big Ten get behind it, and, you know, we can make sure that we can sign and date, this exact time that Mark said, hey, within 3 years, you Big Ten officials and the president of the Big Ten, you need to get on board with us. I think regionally, I think Minnesota has a very good USA Wrestling fundamental base behind it. And I think also Illinois USA Wrestling has a great foundation through the USA Wrestling platform, where there's a lot of athletes coming through those programs, along with the Beat the Streets and Mike Powell at Beat the Streets Chicago. It'd be interesting to see if we could get another Big Ten one in the Midwest getting going. I know Wisconsin also has an amazing USA Wrestling Federation as well, which would then pump right into the University of Wisconsin and maybe help those programs out. But yeah, I think Minnesota would make a lot of sense as well.
Yep, maybe in Nebraska too, like with the George Ivanoff there as the state
Yep.
director of those kind of things, what Dominguez is doing at MWC, there's those kind of things seem like those could be a good fit,
And
So-
one other thing, David, what I wanted to say is that people have to understand that wrestling is one of the least expensive sports to have on a college campus. It really is. When you look at all the things that some of these other sports need, we need a wrestling mat and we need 10 able bodies, depending on the weight classes. And then, your backups and things like that. You don't have to bring in 140 kids for football, like, for wrestling.
Well, you don't want to
have-
compare wrestling to football. You're going to lose that because
No.
football is 100,000 people. And in wrestling, you need singlets and you need headgears and you need shoes and you need knee pads. You need a recruiting budget. You're going to have all these coaches and you're going to travel. Like, I get that argument and it sounds good, but it's just not true. Like, all this other stuff piles up. And then, like, there's some schools, like 200 people go to a dual meet. Like, this is a whole nother conversation. We have 3 minutes left in the pod, but it's like all these people that want like the wrestling to start getting paid, people should be real careful about what they ask for. Because really what would happen is college football players and college basketball players would get paid and a bunch of other sports would get dropped because they're actually money losers. I think Iowa wants to be first and loves wrestling so much, they don't care if they lose some money. And I think the RTC and the fundraising and everything else will help. I think the irony of all this is, however long ago, when Mark Perry went to Sunkist Kids and took all those women with him, it was because, depending on whose story you read, that they didn't get rid of their women's program in the RTC, or they did, or they just said, we're going to stop funding you, but you can stay, which is like, you can still be my girlfriend, but I'm going to stop calling you, you're not going out anymore. And now they're going to recruit a ton of ladies that are RTC eligible. I mean, they're probably not going to recruit anybody that isn't. They're all going to be state placers and Fargo All-Americans and world team members and everything else. I mean, they're going to have a hellacious squad. The other thing is this, just so people understand this, right now, all the women's colleges wrestle in one tournament for nationals, the WCWA. So they wrestle in, like the JUCOs wrestle against the NAIs, against the D1s and all that, right, GT?
So as of like a couple of years ago, the NAI sanctioned their own women's tournament. So anything that was Division II, Division III, JUCO wrestle at the WCWA, and then the NAIs have their own separate. Correct.
So Iowa will have to go into one of those.
Iowa would then go into the WCWA with Sacred Heart, Presbyterian, McKendree, King,
the D2s.
I think Colorado Mesa and the D2s, right?
Yeah.
Augsburg.
Okay, so we got about 1 minute. Want to get this off. Matt Burns, Iowa Central.
I think they'll fold into that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one last thing, Grandview, big weekend. Their first national champion in any sport, Matt Burns, a national champion also at Iowa Central, gets inducted into the Hall of Fame at Grandview. And then Brett Turner, GT's younger, maybe better looking brother, just won the 10 under 10 award. So shout out to both of those guys. Good. You were frozen, GT. I wanted to see your reaction. So it doesn't count if you don't see the reaction. So,
Right.
but no, seriously, congratulations to both of those guys. I know you're proud of your brother, and I know you're proud of Matt, and Matt was a catalyst for your program. Like, somebody's got to be the first guy to go freaking get it done. And the greatest name in wrestling, Matt Burns. I said off the air, if your name is Matthew Burns, you have to go by Matt. So GT, I don't know if you'll be with us next week again. Safe travels. Keep being the best representative that you are for wrestling. Marco, it might be you and I flying solo next week, digging into some weight classes. And everybody that watches and listens, thank you guys so much. We'll be back next week.